Shalom, shalom, shalom. We are live. Baruchim habaim. Welcome to Awakening Torat Mussar Mindfulness. I am Rabbi Chasya Uriel Steinbauer, founder and director of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness. I am beyond delighted to be here with you for our weekly public offering of Awakening, where we look at the weekly Torah portion in the Hebrew Bible from the lens of Mussar in Judaism, the spiritual discipline, the daily discipline of refining our soul traits known as middah on this path towards holiness, and also of mindfulness coming out of the Dharma of Theravada Buddhism, where we take these ancient wisdoms from our ancestors to learn the most from the Torah to guide us on this path. So welcome. Today, we just finished celebrating Tu B'Shvat, the new year of the trees. It's a glorious festival here in Israel, because in Israel, the trees are blooming in the winter. It's the greenest time, I think it's the most beautiful time. And so, we are coming out of that. It's in the middle of the night here on Friday, February 14th, around 1:07 a.m. in Israel. So if you're welcoming and joining us from, say, over in Canada, United States, and South America, then you're earlier in the day on Thursday, on February 13th. And if you're joining us, of course, from the kind of eastern seaboard, right? Any Japan, from New Zealand, Australia, and down, you are later in the day on Friday. And so, welcome if you're joining us somewhere where Israel is. If you're new to us, I invite you to go to our blog at kehilatmussar.com in order to see the previous public offerings of either audio through podcasts, through your favorite place that you love to play the podcast, or of course joining us on video, which this will be saved on the blog. And we live stream every week from our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. And also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever social media can be found. And of course, do subscribe to our newsletter so you can get updates of when we're meeting next and what will go on. So welcome. We are going to be covering VAEIRA today in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. It is the second Torah portion. That the first one was Shemot that we covered last week, and now we're jumping into VAEIRA. For those of you who are following along or need a reminder of where we're located, we're in chapter 6, starting with verse 2, going all the way through chapter 9 to verse 35. So I'm going to give, as I always do every week, V'ezrat Hashem, God willing, a brief summary of this Torah portion. And then I'm going to jump into what I think this Torah portion, its master middah, its master soul trait, is for us to pay attention to this year. And then we're also going to cover one of the 48 ways that we can acquire Torah, the instruction, the life book of how we live out our lives, which is, of course, redacted and also discussed further, first redacted in the Mishnah of the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, and, of course, discussed and gone on through rabbinic exegesis for the past 2,000 years. So that's what we will jump into today. So I'm very excited to head in that direction with you. So let us begin. In this Torah portion, in that week's Torah portion, which took place back on January 25th, 2025, the Hebrew date was Kaf Hey, the 25th of the month of Tevet. in the Hebrew year Tafshin Pei 5785. So God tells Moshe to command Paro, the Pharaoh of Egypt, to free Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, the Israelites. Moshe repeats that he can't do this, that since he has difficult speaking, God tells Moshe that his brother Aharon, Aaron in English, will speak for him. So Moshe and Aharon go to Paro. God turns Aharon's staff into, well, like people translate it as a snake, but in the Hebrew, it's clearly a tanin, it's clearly a crocodile. So that can be left up to discussion. Paro calls for his magicians, and they do the same things with their staff. And Aharon's staff actually swallows the magician's staffs. Paro still refuses to listen to Moshe and Aharon and let the people go. And so God begins to send makot, plagues, that will begin to cause harm and suffering to the Egyptians and to Paro. We have dam, blood, that will take place, Sfardea, frogs, kinim, lice, arov, wild animals, dever, some people translate it as cattle disease, shechin, boils, and barad, hail. And during each plague, Paro offers to let Bnei Israel go, but once the plague stops, Paro changes his mind and refuses to free them, refuses to let them go. So I want to begin by saying, as a summary, that we begin to witness in this Torah portion pervasive demoralization of the Israelites, of the children of Israel, who are receiving and experiencing the negative effects of Paro demanding more labor, harsh labor from them, and they're not being freed. And in the short term, there almost feels to be more trauma, more acute harm and suffering. And this is a reminder, just at the beginning of this discussion, that sometimes in the short term, there has to be more trauma, more discomfort, more of negative stimuli or unwanted, maybe even unpleasant. Some might even say harm and suffering, in order for a long-term goal, right? And this is something to keep in mind for our own individual curriculum and our own past, but also as a nation, as the people of Israel today, and those who are our supporters. But we're in the middle, as you know, of a multi-7-8 front war that is in a ceasefire right now. That does not mean peace, from Iran and its proxies and terror groups. And it's deeply unpleasant for us. There's been harm and suffering. So this short term, even if it feels like it's a long time, we're at like, how many days are we now? I have to look up the exact number to be precise with you. I always post the days we're on since the genocide of October 7th done by Palestinian terrorists into Israel. So it's 496 days, and we still have hostages in Gaza, right? So that feels like a long time. I think I've been alive long enough, and at least have come from a family that was deeply involved in history and the wars, for instance, of the United States and Israel, and then long term of our people over 4,000 years, that we can actually say most wars last multiple years, right? And so in some ways we've lost the capacity to bear the burden of a long-term war. It's almost like we can't tolerate it anymore. And I think part of that is the social media and the immediate access and gratification from access to these smartphones, in addition to just the speeding up of life in general. But this has been unfolding for years as nation states moved from face-to-face combat to more clandestine and wars far away or done with missiles or drones, so that it's the population doesn't have to tolerate it as much, right? At least the ones of more, let's say, maybe of privilege, perhaps. So we see pervasive demoralization, and with it comes a divine reaffirmation. God witnesses this demoralization, and provides a certainty of redemption first through speech, in first person speech with 7 verbs, essentially, with the goal, essentially, through these 7 verbs, right, of the most famous of them, if I can pull them up here quickly for you. I wasn't going to spend much time on the 7 verbs, but I want at least to point out for where you're located. But the idea of that, let's see here if I can pull it out. Yes. It's in chapter 6, starting on, which verse is it starting? It's when God says, I've heard the moaning of the Israelites, and I've remembered the brit, the covenant. And so it starts on the pasuk on verse 6. It says, I will free you from the labors. I will deliver you from the bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will take you to be my people. It goes on. I will bring you into the land that I swore. I will give it to you as a possession. And this is through this slow process. And sometimes when there's verbal affirmation, it doesn't feel enough in the present moment, right? But through these makot, these plagues, and through this verbal affirmations, an attempt to experience the display of divine might, essentially. And one of the ways that we get to witness in this Torah portion, which is so important, I want to point out 2 things here. Is that I'm finally going to introduce what I think is the master middah of this Torah portion, at least this year. Changes every year that we study this. Is, of course, one of the foundational middot in the Mussar system, which is anava. It is humility. Now, humility doesn't mean what we understand it to mean often in the English word. According to Mussar, it's how much space you take up, and is it appropriate to who you are in any given circumstances or conditions. And so one of the key mantras, morning affirmation, we say, for instance, is no more than my place, no less than my space. This idea that each of us in our own curriculum and who we are must figure that out, given every daily circumstance of who we're relating to, what hat we happen to be wearing at the moment, of what is appropriate. So, for instance, one of the examples given by, I'm trying to remember the teacher. Maybe it was actually Rob Micha Berger. Forgive me if I'm quoting the wrong person, but this idea that, like, say a father is a police officer as his career, right? So it's very appropriate for him to take up a lot of physical and verbal space, say if he's out on his profession and job in the middle of the street directing traffic, especially if, let's say, there's an auto accident. And so, of course, he must kind of be the center and the one that's directing everyone. But if he, say, then was later that evening invited to a parents' night at the school, at the local school, and he shows up into the classroom with that same hat the mishtara, right? The police officer, the shoter, and takes up that same amount of space, it would be obnoxious. It wouldn't be appropriate, right? That's not what he is supposed to do in that classroom environment. He's supposed to withdraw, allow the teacher and maybe the menaheret, the principal, to lead, and or menahel. And this is very important. Okay, so this is the base. Why is the middah so important here? So key to this middah is really understanding, especially in today's day and age, everything that we're facing, that anava, balanced humility, is a deep understanding, seeing clearly, and acceptance of the forces that surround us, shape us, direct us, right? And balanced humility here is not necessarily surrendering, oh, I can't do anything given the circumstances of the war or the world right now, right? But it's a willingness, right? And an engagement with grappling with the forces that are beyond our control, right? Having the wisdom to admit that to ourselves and to accept it. This is beyond my control, right? And at the same time, shaping the reality of the world especially in our own personal spaces, in our homes, in our communities, that we seek to build and perpetuate, right? And it's really knowing to understand our own place in the world. It's in no way should there be a diminished sense of self, even if, say, our place happens to be very homebound at the moment because, say, that we're disabled or live with chronic disease or illness. It is an understanding that we are created in the image and likeness of the divine, and that we all contribute, we all do the best we can, right? That's the key thing here. And to know that we are to participate, right? And I would say even more than this, a specific example that comes out of this Torah portion, and then I'll say some more, is when Moshe, when God says to Moshe that the people will listen to you, the text is very specific to say le kolcha, to or for your voice, rather than be kolcha, rather instead of in your voice, right? And implying that there's some unintended consequence to Moshe taking the right amount of space up and using his voice, despite that he feels he has nothing to offer, despite that he feels that he can't speak or can't speak the way that he wants to, the way he thinks he should. There's definitely a struggle of not wanting things to be the way they are for Moshe, in the sense of not wanting to take up the space as the leader, out of whether it's real or a fear of him having kaved lashon, right? This heavy tongue, this heavy mouth, whatever that might mean. Okay, so this language here, the text seems to be saying that the people are going to be listening to you, the voice, and you. And it may not be the specific content of your words, right? Because the truth is, the people are so overburdened with the suffering of slavery and the more and more demands placed on them by the office of Paro. They might not even hear all of it. But what they can, so even if they can't hear his words, maybe if he can't even speak them and say them so clearly, or what he thinks needs to happen, that he thinks it needs to be some type of eloquent speech, they can hear his voice. They can hear his voice. And in the midst of sorrow and pain, it is as if God is there with them. Here comes this human who is a servant of God, Eved Hashem, who is standing there and saying, I am here, regardless of the outcome of my voice, the outcome of the command I give to Paro to free you. I am here and I will be here, and we're here for the long term. That right now we're experiencing acute trauma and suffering and pain. So there's something really significant here, right? It's Moshe over time having to learn that his showing up and his voice is going to have an impact different than expected, but it still has an impact. And this is so important to our own path and our own activism, each in our own way of how can we show up and try to care for one another, have more compassion, lay really strong boundaries, care for our children and soldiers, care for the hostages, care for all the refugees, that some of them are still not returned and in their homes here in Israel, and rebuilding the communities in the north and along the Gaza border. We need to rebuild our people and our communities, right? And so we need to just show up, right? And so some of the key questions through this cultivation of accepting that there are going to be unattended consequences that are out of our control, just like most of what's happening right now is out of our control. And we want to ask, bring Hashem, the divine, in this moment, right? How can we turn to the stories that we're turning to right now in the Torah for our ancestors? How can they support us and strengthen us, right? So this is so important because, and I say this all the time, that I think, and this is my insight this year, that the text is actually performative. The Torah is performative. It is actually teaching us through its own choice of which stories it tells, a choice of its own speech in the text. It's modeling for us what to do. And that's very profound. So even in this whole dialogue that's coming in chapter 6, starting with verse 10, where Hashem says to Moshe, go and tell Paro to let the people depart. He says the people are not going to listen to me. Well, they might not listen to your specific words, but they're going to listen that you showed up and used your voice, right? They're not going to listen to me. Then how will Paro heed me? A man of impeded speech, right? Uncircumcised tongue. So the Lord spoke to both Moshe and Aharon and regarded them and instructed them to deliver, right? So this is really, we can't know the effect of our showing up. We can't know the effect or the unintended consequence of our speech, but we must show up. We must participate. And this is what the text is modeling for us. It's quite beautiful. And then I realized halfway through this, I'm going to show one more example, that this constant hardening of Paro's heart, we always say people debate, what is this really about? Who's it for? Who's it expecting? And for the first time, I thought, maybe this is to strengthen and train Moshe. Maybe also in addition to the children of Israel, but definitely Moshe. It's definitely an unintended consequence if that's not, let's say, the main intention of Hashem for providing and doing the makot, the plagues, and also hardening Pharaoh's heart. He has to learn how to take up the proper amount of space. He has to learn how to act and to lead, and not to allow doubt and the shadow self that we all have to take up too much space. Now, this is a new way that God has, I feel that God has granted me through what we call shefa, abundance and grace. And it has come down to new wisdom for me. that I'm sharing with you tonight. That we always talked about anava, humility, as about how much space we take up in relation to other people, maybe other sentient beings, the earth. But I realize that we have an internal self. We have a shadow self that sometimes Mussar calls the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. I prefer more of a mindfulness spin on it, that it's a state that maybe is unwanted, unpleasant, that leads us towards delusion, greed, ill will, and doubt, those hindrances. And we can't get rid of it. We shouldn't even try. There was a time in Mussar that, especially certain school of Mussar, that sought to do battle with the shadow self, with the Yetzer Hara. I don't advocate that. I don't actually even believe it. I think that it's much more important to face it. It's part of us. Hashem wants it there for a reason. I think it actually helps us long term in our growth, even if it doesn't feel that way short term. And so Moshe too had to have a curriculum and a practice and a way of actually being out in the field to do the Mussar mindfulness work from all the practice that he was doing, right? To face that doubt, to face the shadow self, to not allow the shadow self within to take up too much space. That means itself within has to be balanced and maybe even a little calmer and quieter. And that's really radical, to realize that we have this energy and this state within that sometimes will really put forward an unskillful, unwise voice. And we have to recognize that part of balancing anava and humility and being able to take up the proper amount of space is to calm the embers of the shadow side of the self, allow it to humble some, right? And that's really profound. So I'm going to go on to say that we also witness anava, humility, and the 14th way that we can acquire Torah, according to the Mishnah, is tahara, is purity. And purity, understood in Judaism, in the sense, it's really a kind of defilement, the opposite of defilement. That's impurity, right? Tameh. It's in order to the opposite of defilement. It's living with integrity, making sure the insides match the outside behavior, and the opposite of it, right, which I mentioned, right, is tameh, which is this sort of defilement that sometimes can be so severe in one's behavior, especially in national policy, that no matter how much one tries to, say, reverse or cleanse oneself of it, you won't be able to change it. You won't be able to head towards purity. And why is this important? Because we're dealing with a nation state, Egypt, Paro, who is engaging in and was in infanticide and genocide of the Hebrews, of the Israelites, of our ancestors, the Jewish people. That is a stain. That is a type of act that has caused such impurity in Paro and in the state and among the among the Egyptian people, that it leaves an understanding that there's no cleansing of this. There's no coming to purity for this behavior. And so you might think, which we have modern day examples today, unfortunately, the genocide in Sudan, the genocide of October 7th in Israel, the ongoing behavior of the Palestinian terrorists, Islamic Brotherhood, Hamas, The stain is so great. The impurity is so great. There's no purity here, right? There's no integrity. And so with that, and I would say God's greatest modeling moment for us, that even despite a people, a leadership, a national policy that is so beyond the pale, that is crimes against humanity, that God goes ahead in the middle of announcing the plague of Barad, of hail. God comes in chapter 9, verse 19, before the plague of the hail, and tells Moshe to tell Paro, now your animals and everything you have out in the open should be brought under shelter. Every human being and beast that is found outside, not having been brought indoors, shall die when the hail comes down. There was no warning, long and detailed, before any of the other Makot plagues. And so not only do we have a unique warning here, we also have a unique response. That's not reactivity. It's not even a hardening of the heart. So coming out of Midrash and Tachuma, right, Bubar, VAEIRA 20, Kaf, it says, in none of the other plagues did Paro say God is righteous. So after this happens, Paro, after the Barad falls, and the Egyptians had time to bring in their human slaves, the humans outside, and their beasts, Paro admits that he was wrong, and says actually Hashem Hasadik, right? Hasadik, that God is righteous, right? That language used here, Hashem Hasadik. So in none of the other plagues did Paro actually say God is righteous, except for this plague. Why? A person or a people or a nation state or an army who is fighting and trying to beat the other side might surprise them and kill them and take all that they have. Now, that is clearly what radicalized jihadist Arab Muslims wish to do. But God says to Paro here, your animals and everything that you have out in the open should be brought under shelter. And at that moment, Paro says, Hashem, God, Hasadik, God is righteous. So following the destruction the hail causes, right? Paro praises God. This is in Shemot, in chapter 9, verse 27. So this midrash links the unusual warning of the plague to the unusual response to the plague. Meaning in that moment, Paro learned that God is fair, that God shows more care and compassion for the Egyptians than God is expected to and maybe should have. Even when God is sending makot, plagues, to hurt them. God is showing us how to live and be here as an army, as a people, as a nation state that needs to protect her citizens and people. What is fair and unfair in fight, right? Is it important? Is this important that God warned about the hail to protect the animals out in the field and the humans that were out there? So what does our very army do, the IDF, before we are going to either fight in or send missiles to an area that, of course, is populated by civilians, because Palestinian terrorists' whole method, in this case, particularly Hamas, but others also, whole tactic is to embed itself and hide among civilians. So, meaning civilians are going to be put in front of the terrorists to be killed on purpose. So the IDF will drop leaflets and texts and send SMS and WhatsApp messages warning the people residing in Gaza that a missile is coming. This is righteous and fair. Maybe when it's not even warranted, right? Maybe when it even shouldn't have happened. Because God is teaching us, how do we model for ourselves? And we also don't know the unintended consequence of that behavior. Perhaps the purpose is to get the Gazans to recognize the IDF as fair, as Sadiq, and maybe even more so as finally the victor, to submit, to say, and perhaps even to the terrorists, that we have failed, we have lost this war, to submit. May that be an unintended consequence, right? Who knows? I don't know if that's really the kavanah, the intention of the leaflets. I don't think so. But we just can't know. And this is part of the humility of we must act, we must do the best we can so that we also can walk with tahara, with purity. And our army can walk away after dropping the leaflets, not knowing that they've warned people. They can walk away with taharut, right? This purity of integrity, that they're living out their values that Hashem has demonstrated for us so clearly in the Torah, so beautifully, right before the Makkah of Barad, of the plague of hail, right? Before Hashem storms down hail, firing brimstones, before we fire down with missiles. Whether or not it's warranted, or even we should be to a people who have committed genocide against us, who want to cause us great harm and suffering, who actually want to erase us from the land, from our ancestral land. We still do this because it is about our way of acquiring Torah. Okay, it's our being right with Hashem, with God. Okay, it's not a small thing. It's a huge commitment and practice that sometimes even puts our own children and army in harm's way. So I don't say these words lightly. So with that, I think the final thing I will share with you is that something odd shows up in our Torah portion, that all of a sudden in chapter 6 and verses 14 to 25, a whole I can't even say the word, genealogy of our ancestors at the time are listed here. And I think, why is this coming in the middle of the Makot? And I really feel that it symbolizes the vigor and the continuity to inject, to send that zerizut, that enthusiasm, send that resilience and the ability to pivot, right? A reassuring note during this difficult time of great pervasive demoralization. To remember who your ancestors are, and that they survived for you, that they brought you to this moment, and that you too will survive and bring your children, grandchildren, and your people forward over time. And so this is why we turn to the Torah week in and week out, especially during these acute, painful times of war. To remember they came before us, they brought us to this moment, the Shechianu, and we too will bring forth more and more generations. And that's the gift. That's the gift of acquiring Torah and Torah itself. Okay, this is the path of Mussar mindfulness that we are engaging in through Torah. with that, I don't think there's anything else I wanted to share with you. I'm just going to briefly look at my notes, so I'm not missing one thing for you. I talked about Tahara, and I talked about Anava. There's only so much I can hold in my head, right? Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. May we take these teachings and really understand our place with deep, balanced anava, with deep humility, that we're here to serve, to care for others and God, and that our behavior will have unintended consequences, even when we are fearful and think that we're not good enough, or we can't do the job, whatever it might be, that we can. And sometimes it might not even be what exactly that we do or the speech that we use, but that people will know that we showed up, that we cared. And that has huge consequences, positive ones, most likely. So with that, we're going to move into a short mindfulness meditation together. I invite you to assume your posture, whether you need to walk back and forth or stand in a strong mountain pose or lie down. Keep your eyes open so you're still awake and alert while at ease. And if you're like me, you're going to come to the edge of your chair. I'm going to lower a little so I can plant my feet on the ground. Why do I want to plant my feet on the ground? It really grounds us. We're held by Mother Earth, and we can feel. And we can also feel the weight of our seat bones much stronger. This is very important for all of us to look around our room, to know that we are safe and we're here together practicing. This is especially important not only for new practitioners of mindfulness meditation, but also for anyone who has any traumatic background, which many, if not most of us do. That sometimes we can be triggered in meditation. Sometimes bodily memories can come up. Sometimes the quiet and the silence can bring up, and we can feel really unsafe in that moment. So I need you to be able to ground yourself. And if you need to, keep your eyes open or open them if you come to a certain story or narrative that pulls you into the shadow self. It's taking up too much space. Right? And then just pause and open your eyes, right? For the rest of us who are not feeling in an acute reactivity or acute trauma, I invite you to shut your eyes. If anyone else, you can just lower your gaze and really arrive. Invite yourself fully here. Head, heart, soul, body, all together. You can rest your hands in your lap, or you might want to hold your heart, whatever speaks to you today. And we're going to start with a deep inhalation. Hold it, and then blow out the mouth. Extending the out breath longer than the in breath in order to cause a calming effect on the body. Inhalation again through the nose if you're able. Hold. And out slowly. And finally, again, raising the shoulders up. Inhalation. Hold and let them fall. Letting out the out breath. Fully arriving, feeling present, awake, alert, and at ease. May seem contradictory, but it's a beautiful gift in the daily practice of sitting together. So first, we just recognize the gift that Hashem, God, has brought us to this moment to share this meditation together. that we have vitality and vigor passed down to us from our ancestors, and that we are here. We are here to support one another, support ourselves, this radical act of self-care. Feel the real gift of oxygen that God gives us, like the tree roots expanding and growing in our lungs and pushing out in the inhalation, contracting in the exhalation, allowing your breath to fall to its own natural rhythm. No need to control the breath now. Just noticing all the body sensations of how beautiful and amazing it is to be alive and to be able to breathe. You especially know this if you're coming out of any seasonal flu or COVID, God forbid. It's so great to be alive and not coughing when you take an inhalation. These things that we call hakarata tov, the recognizing the good, are so important and foundational to our practice. They allow us to help balance our anavar, humility, because we know that which we are awake to is good. It's in our lives, that we are worthy, that God has granted us these gifts. Profound sense of joy and tahara, of purity, of deep integrity. So much of this practice is just being able to bear witness to whatever arises, whether it's thoughts running around in our head or sensations in the body that could be unpleasant or maybe pleasant, or deep emotions trailing and running through us. To be able to just witness with curiosity, without reactivity, without trying to fix or change whatever is arising in us, is developing a discipline. It's training the mind and heart to bear witness. And this is foundational to our path, to be able to know that we are in a world right now that is constant reactivity, constant stimuli, constant power battles that are beyond our control, that we are to bear witness without reactivity. That we can respond wisely, skillfully. So needed in our souls and in our world today. And this is done through the daily practice of mindfulness meditation and the ongoing path of Mussar mindfulness, the daily kabbalot and practices that we share in community and a va'ad and a group, strengthening one another. I invite you to reach out to us to see how you can learn and practice, or if you're already an established va'ad or practicing elsewhere or learning, be in touch to join a group here when you are ready to experience great elevation, great joy on this path towards holiness, great purpose. So in our last minute of silence, allowing yourself to really internalize the beautiful prayer that comes to us from the whole movement to support addiction, whether it be alcoholics, eating disorder, drugs, whatever it might be. The serenity prayer that comes to say, right, I accept the things I cannot change. The courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know the difference. And before we can accept the things we cannot change, we have to see clearly. We have to practice balanced humility to know our place and space in the world. To know this is beyond my control. And I can work now on practicing accepting it. I will ring the bells when it's time to come out of the meditation. Allow yourself to feel your takeaway from today's practice. If you have your eyes shut, gently and slowly open them to allow the light to filter in. If you have a practice of bowing, bow to Hashem, to God, for bringing us together for this moment and passing this amazing tradition of Mussar mindfulness to us, to celebrate, to practice, to expand. Bow to each other for supporting each other, engaging in this practice, in this path. Bow to our ancestors and all of our teachers who have brought us this amazing wisdom. Bow to yourself for showing up and engaging in the practice and this radical self-care. So grateful to arrive to this moment. So today we thank a wonderful supporter of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness, Eileen Stein, wonderful parent to a beloved student of mine who I train for his upcoming bar mitzvah, for him becoming a bar mitzvah, a son of the commandments. She, in learning of the death of my Ima, my mother, may her memory be for a blessing, decided to sponsor this sitting in loving memory of my Ima, and to sponsor and just to offer great tzedakah donation to the Institute for Holiness. And so we thank you. Thank you for allowing us to arrive to this moment and pass on these teachings. And if you too want to sponsor a sitting, the public offering of Awakening Torat Mussar Mindfulness, just reach out to us at kehilatmussar.com or email me at Rabbi Chasya at kehilatmussar.com. You can sponsor in honor of someone or in loving memory of someone, and it would be delightful to receive your support. So thank you for today. We will soon meet, B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, to cover Parashat Bo, and may it be so. Wishing you all well as you come out of celebrating the New Year of the Trees.